to Still Speak Podcast. This is episode 2 of my family Dynasty murder mystery involving the prestigious Murdoch family in Hampton County, South Carolina. Obviously, there's an episode 1. If you've not heard that, go take a listen. But for the rest of you, holy moly, folks. I'm officially hooked. I jumped so far down the rabbit hole, I almost couldn't find my way out. Obviously, I did, because here I am. But I'm just so blown away by all the moving parts in this case and the people and the paths. It's just wild and fascinating. But I also think this story can be something entirely different than what it appears to be at quick glance or how it's being presented in the media. At least for me anyways, it gave me a vibe of someone wanting revenge, and I said that in episode 1, and I know there are many who felt the same. The question I'm going to throw out there before we get back to this is, what if the fact the family is connected to several deaths and processed cases on the 14th Judicial Circuit for many decades and had a large, powerful law firm as a possibility of someone wanting revenge was actually the perfect cover for something far more sinister? Think about it. What if all of that was the perfect opportunity and cover for something more sinister? I'm going to leave that there for now while we move on. Let's start with an update about Alex Murdoch. I mentioned briefly in one of my videos yesterday that Alex has resigned from the law firm and made a very bizarre statement yesterday, and it didn't have much context. Here was the initial statement. Quote, "The murders of my wife and son have caused an incredibly difficult time in my life. I've made a lot of decisions that I truly regret. I'm resigning from my law firm and entering rehab after a long battle that has been exacerbated by these murders. I am immensely sorry to everyone I've hurt, including my family, friends, and colleagues. I ask for prayers as I rehabilitate myself and my relationships." Unquote. My mouth dropped. Without knowing more at the time, I read it and immediately had this gut feeling, and my entire view of this case changed, and I jumped down the rabbit hole. Now, yesterday, we got more information. Alex Murdoch was pushed out of his powerful law firm over claims that he had misused funds, and this happened the day before calling 911 to say that he'd been shot on the side of the road on the way to Charleston. A leader in the law firm said that they discovered that Mr. Murdoch had misappropriated funds from the law office and that he had to resign on Friday. Alex was a partner at the law firm that was founded by his great-grandfather more than a century ago. In a statement to the New York Times, the firm said it hired a forensic accounting firm to investigate the suspected misappropriating of funds, and that they had also notified the police and the South Carolina bar. Now, this alone is a huge story, right? Because you have this family, they've been in the judicial court, they've had this law firm for a century, and now one of the members of this family, the Murdoch family, is falling from grace, basically. He's been messing with funds, and he has an addiction, apparently, etc. The law firm told Alex about the accusations on Friday, and then Alex and the firm agreed that he should resign. Mr. Murdoch's lawyer said his client had expressed his regret and sorrow, and the law office did not say how much money was missing, but a member of the firm, speaking on the condition of anonymity, basically said that he was not authorized to disclose the exact amount, but said the amount was in the millions. Alex's lawyer, Mr. Griffin, said that Alex Murdoch has been released from the hospital on Monday after his injury was determined to not be life-threatening, and that he immediately met with investigators from the South Carolina Law Enforcement Division, they are called SLED, which is investigating the double killing and shooting of Mr. Murdoch. And the double killing is obviously the double killing of Paul and Maggie Murdoch, Alex's wife and son. Griffin also said Alex's account of the shooting on Saturday remained the same, and that someone had driven by in a truck as he was changing a tire. They then drove back around and asked him if he was having car trouble, and the next thing Mr. Murdoch heard was a gunshot. Griffin said state law enforcement authorities had told him that no weapon had been found at the scene and that there was a slice in one of Mr. Murdoch's tires. Lastly, Griffin added that the police investigators were aware of the accusations against Mr. Murdoch and his departure from the law firm. Now, why does this make me jump headfirst into a rabbit hole of rumors and speculation and details, that the mainstream media is not telling me? Well, if we go back, we know Alex paid the housekeeper, Gloria Satterfield's family, $500,000 in 2018, just a few months prior to his son Paul being involved in a boating accident after a night of heavy partying, and resulted in the death of Mallory Beach, just 19 years old. And Paul was criminally charged, and there was also a civil suit filed by Mallory Beach's family against the Murdoch family as well. 3 days prior to the double murders of Maggie and Paul Murdoch, we discussed in episode 1 that a motion was filed for the Murdochs to turn over all their financial records after many attempts of trying to get them to turn it over on their own. Okay? So now we have Alex Murdoch having to resign from the very law firm his great-grandfather started due to misappropriating funds, and possibly into the millions. Now, there's also mention in the statement about rehab, and the rumor mill is saying it's opiates. We don't know, but that's what the rumor mill is saying. His statement implies that the deaths of his wife and son made this situation worse. And I can understand an addiction getting worse due to stress and grief. However, I'm finding it hard to believe that, he was messing around with funds into the millions only in the last 3 months since their deaths. I have a feeling that this went on before that as well, and could explain why he would not turn over his financial records back in June. And this raised an eyebrow because 3 days after this motion was filed to get these financial records is when Paul and Maggie were murdered. Okay, so major red flag for me right there, personally. I felt that Alex's 911 call that night, that he found his wife and son, sounded rather genuine. And some people who were thinking that Alex was a suspect, even changed their tune after hearing the 911 call. But 2 nights ago, I made a video and I included the 911 call. And as I was listening to it again, and this was before I found out that he resigned and that it had to do with money, I got a different vibe from the 911 call than I initially did when it was first released. At the end of the 911 call, it sounds like Alex had put the phone down and was yelling into it, whether on speaker or not. He sounds very far away and like he's shouting into the phone so that the operator could hear him. And he claimed in the call that he wasn't near the bodies because at one point he says, I'm going to go back down there. And then he talks about not wanting to go over there, but he could see them because then he mentions they're not moving and he doesn't think they're alive. But, why? Why would he have the phone down? So if you're not over there touching them or touching the scene, why was the phone not in your hand? I don't know. That ending of the 911 call sounded very, in my opinion, staged. I'm trying to stay level-headed here, and I got to keep in mind that this is not a movie. But some movies are, made from parts or all of a real story, right? Or they get the idea from a real story and then they make a twist to it and then they put it out as a movie. I sure as heck feel like I'm watching a suspense movie, though. But I'm trying to keep level-headed and thinking, not get into crazy, off-the-wall stuff and processing all these thoughts that I'm having here. Now, many believe, that someone, as I said, connected to Mallory Beach took justice into their own hands. And I can see why people think that this is, possible. My issue is why? Why? Paul had not gone to trial yet. It's not like he went to trial and he got away with it because of his family name and, justice was not served. They also filed multiple lawsuits against Paul and the bars, etc. And that costs money to do. Now, I can understand being angry enough to want immediate revenge, like in the same year that the boating accident occurred, which was 2019. But almost 2.5 years later? I'm not totally sure about that. I actually know somebody who lost several loved ones via murder, and the grief is intense. And it's enough for one to cause harm, but there's also a heaviness of just wanting to make it from sun up to sun down without feeling paralyzed. And I said murder weird. Sorry about that. Everyone grieves differently, though, so we have to keep in mind one may be stricken by grief in the form of sadness, and others will be stricken in the form of anger, and others will be both. It varies. But why Paul and his mother first? You can say that Maggie created him, enabled him, defended him. Okay, sure, but so did Alex then, right? So why not strike Alex, Paul, and Maggie and take out all three, like when they were together on the property at some point? Right? Further, why take the mother-son duo out in the evening, so it was dark outside, and do it on their remote 1,700-acre property, but then attempt to kill Alex in the middle of broad daylight on the side of the road? Why not wait until he was at the remote property or any other property and at minimum, but strike him at dark? And also, if the goal was to take out the one who killed Mallory Beach, and Maggie was there, so when they got the opportunity, so she had to go too, but then why also try to kill Alex? The target was Paul. He's dead. He's gone forever. Surely killing Alex's wife and son would hurt him immensely for the rest of his own life. So now why take the risk and attempt to commit another murder? Alex's wound was superficial. Someone took out Maggie and Paul by, multiple gunshots each, which tells me that they wanted to make sure that they were dead before they left the scene of the crime. If you're taking the risk to shoot someone, on the side of the road in broad daylight, don't you think you'd make sure you succeeded? Another thought, though, is if Alex saw the car, why have we not received any information about the car or the driver? Typically, they give that information so the public can be on the lookout. Unless Alex turned around, never turned around to see the driver or the car, we don't know, right? I'm just throwing out thoughts here. Or is this a case of someone in the community who's sick of this family and the debts that are connected to them? Or is this someone that's mad about a case that the law firm handled? But if so, why target the Murdoch family at the law firm and not the other lawyers' families? Maybe it was someone whose case was handled by one of the Murdoch solicitors in the 14th Judicial Circuit. Okay. But again, why specifically Alex Murdoch and his family and not any other Murdoch family member like Alex's brothers or father? Which brings me to remind you that Randolph Murdoch III died 3 days after the deaths of Maggie and Paul, which is the 5th death connected to Alex Murdoch in under 6 years. Now, mind you, Randolph was older and he had cancer, but it's still incredibly odd timing. Now, it was initially reported that Alex's alibi had been that he went hunting prior to finding their bodies, which I thought was suspect initially because I thought, well, was that intentional so that he'd have gunpowder residue on his hands? So if they tested his hands and he had gunpowder residue, he would have, a convenient explanation as to why that was. But then another source said that Alex went to the hospital with his father, Randolph Murdoch III, on the day of the double murder. After taking his father to the hospital, Alex went to check on his mother before returning to his hunting estate where he located the bodies of his wife and son. Neither of these alibis that are circulating came directly from law enforcement, though. This is just what sources have said. His father, as I said, died 3 days later. A death after a death, that's common, especially when it's an unexpected loss. And sometimes we say, people die from heartbreak, right? But only 3 days later, what are the odds of that? I'm sure that's the case, but it's hard not to question that because the story is just wild, right? So it's did he really die from his cancer in old age 3 days later? Seriously, what are the odds of that? Now, SLED did say that Alex was fully cooperating with the investigation and that he was not a suspect, but it was said at one point in the media that he was a person of interest, which does make sense because he is the closest one to Paul and Maggie, plus he's the one that found the bodies and it was his property. But we have to also keep in mind that Alex does not need to be directly involved, if you know what I mean. Okay? There's a possibility of someone being hired in this story. Not an accusation. I'm just saying it's a possibility. One final note to mention before we move on is that the uncles of Paul, so Alex's brother, did say on TV in June that Paul Murdoch was receiving threats prior to his death. But we all know in the true crime community, this could be staged. I'm sure if this is true, the police have all the information they need where these threats were coming from. To continue on in this episode series, let's talk about Stephen Smith and his portion of the story. I told you in the first episode that Stephen was a 19-year-old gay man who was found dead in the middle of the road in July of 2015, and his death was originally said to be a hit and run. And throughout the investigation into Smith's death, the Murdoch family name came up 40 times. Documents show 40 times. And several of these were tips based on rumors people had reported to the police. And not only was Paul mentioned in the documents, but also his brother Buster. And there seems to be this underlying fear of this family's power in statements that had been made from people who called in or witnesses that were made during the Stephen Smith investigation and Mallory Beach's investigation. So there's definitely an underlying fear of this family for sure. No one was ever charged in Stephen's death, but after the deaths of Paul and Maggie, the investigation led SLED to open an investigation about Stephen Smith as well. And before SLED opened its case, the South Carolina Highway Patrol, so SCHP, was the agency assigned to investigate Stephen's death initially. And SLED opened its investigation into the death of Stephen Smith based on the information that was gathered during the course of the double murder investigation of Paul and Maggie Murdoch. In the weeks following that announcement, national media started to ascend on Hampton County, of course. And it's kind of funny because I saw on Twitter the other day that Nancy Grace was actually out in Hampton County, so I guess she's going to be doing a story about it. I don't typically follow Nancy Grace anymore, but I did notice that. As details about this family were unfolding, of course, media outlets wanted to speak to Stephen's mother. And she said, quote, "The media just wants a story. I just want justice," unquote. And she told this to Fitz News. Sandy Smith shared that Stephen had a twin sister and that he was born at only 2 pounds 12 ounces in 1996 and was given a 50% chance of survival. And as we know, he did survive that. She also said that Stephen was always studious and had plans on becoming a nurse before he can afford medical school. In fact, Stephen was in class at Orangeburg Technical College on the night before he died on July 8, 2015. Here are some details. Smith was found before 4 a.m. on July 8, 2015, in the middle of the road. There was no tire marks and no debris from a vehicle was found at the scene. His shoes were loosely tied on his feet when he was found. His car was located 3 miles away on Bamberg Highway with the gas cap off, and this gave the impression that he ran out of gas or had issues, so went to walk for gas. But as someone who constantly forgets to put her gas cap back on after getting gas, I don't know, it can mean anything. His shoulder was partially dislocated and his head was bruised due to blunt force trauma, and no other major injuries occurred. And you're not going to believe this, but I just had a pop-up on my laptop that says that the state bar has suspended Alex Murdoch. So there's that. Wow, this story is getting crazy. But back to Stephen. So he had no other major injuries. South Carolina Highway Patrol officers were told that it wasn't a car accident, so they didn't have to be at the autopsy. And at the autopsy, a pathologist, Dr. Aaron Bresnell, ruled that Stephen was killed in a hit-and-run crash. And 2 of the South Carolina Highway Patrol investigators spoke with Bresnell and described a hostile experience working with this pathologist, and couldn't get a direct answer from her on why she ruled Stephen's death as a vehicle accident. The actual coroner said that he didn't believe that Stephen's death was a hit and run. Thank you to Fitz News for these few details about Stephen's case. Sandy Smith told The Guardian she heard rumors about an older man stalking Stephen, but she also heard other rumors, and she reiterated several times her opinion is that her son was killed for being gay by several local Hampton County youths from prestigious families, which she believes have, sworn to protect their children no matter what heinous crime they committed. Sandy said that she believed that Stephen would not have been walking on Sandy Run Road in the middle of the night, and she didn't buy the hit and run theory at all. She said some boys, some of whom were Stephen's classmates, were coming home from a baseball game, and she believes that they took him from his car. Now, I'm going to talk about several people that were mentioned in Stephen's case file and how they can connect to the Murdoch family. Now, this might get a little confusing, so buckle up or get a notepad, either or. Okay. So a Sean Connolly was named in the case documents and about Stephen. And he was mentioned by a Patrick Wilson. And Patrick Wilson had claimed that Sean hit Stephen with his truck. And also, Sean was in the car with Patrick when Patrick got into an argument with a man one day in August of 2015, where he then fired shots at the man's car that had 2 other passengers in it. And Sean told police in his statement that Patrick Wilson grabbed his gun and shot at a sign at the car after he argued with a man. A Hampton County grand jury indicted Patrick Wilson on attempted murder and assault and battery in August of 2015, and that would be 1 month after the death of Stephen Smith. While Wilson was out on bond, the family that he allegedly shot at filed several harassment complaints about Wilson. In February 2018, Wilson's indictment in the 14th Circuit Solicitor's Office, so where Alex Murdoch worked as a part-time solicitor and where other generations of Murdochs were solicitors, decided not to prosecute, and the charges were dropped. Now, 2018 was also the year the housekeeper of the Murdoch family died from a slip and fall, where Alex Murdoch had to pay $500,000 out to her family for her death, since this slip and fall happened on his property. Okay? So you have this Sean Connolly and this Patrick Wilson. They were in the car together. They got into a fight with somebody on the road. Patrick Wilson shot at this car. His case was being handled through Hampton County and the 14th Circuit, where the Murdoch family is, obviously has the connection there, and that office decided not to prosecute, and charges were dropped against Wilson in the same year that the housekeeper also died, and the family got $500,000 out of Alex Murdoch for her death, since it happened on his property. Whew, okay. The next person in the web is Corey Fleming. Corey is a close friend of the Murdoch family, and Corey Fleming represented Patrick Wilson that we just discussed in his case. In 2018, he also represented Gloria Satterfield, the family's wrongful death suit against Alex Murdoch. Again, Gloria is the housekeeper. In 2019, Fleming temporarily represented Connor Cook, who was a passenger on the boat the night Mallory Beach was killed in the boating accident where Paul ended up being criminally charged for. So Corey is a close friend of the Murdoch family, but he was working with Patrick Wilson, whose charges ended up being dropped, and also Gloria Satterfield, the housekeeper's wrongful death settlement, and Connor Cook, a passenger on the boat the night Mallory Beach was killed. Whew. This was a lot to process when I was reading it. The lead investigator, Todd Proctor, on the Stephen Smith case from the Highway Patrol, called two individuals in documents by the names Kevin and Jack because they were either underage or their names had not been publicly released, so he gave them, fake names. But the Kevin individual is someone who was facing two separate lawsuits from the Murdoch law firm at the time he did an interview with Proctor. Okay, so this fake name Kevin had two lawsuits against him by the Murdoch law firm. And the Jack individual in the Stephen Smith case was the only person to be interviewed in the investigation twice. So Proctor calls Jack in this investigation, and the conversation starts out, and then Jack says, quote, "I was with friends one night, and out of the blue, my friend Monica," now this is a fake name as well, "we already knew he got hit or whatever, but we didn't know who did it. We just heard Buster did it. Everybody knows who Buster is, and his family, and all that. And it was kind of shocking, and all that. And I guess we kept talking about it, and it started spreading around," unquote. And then Jack continues to talk about this fake Monica. Quote, "Monica told me this. She's my classmate. She was like, 'You won't believe who did it.' And she said his name, and I was like, 'Really?' Unquote." He goes on to say that Monica heard it from, also a fake name, Kayla, whose father works in law enforcement. And then Proctor says, quote, "The story I got is that Buster and one or two other people were driving around and saw Stephen's car. They looped around, saw him on the road, struck something out of the vehicle, and it hit him. Is that the story you heard?" Unquote. Jack says, "Yes." Proctor, quote, "Like I told Kevin this morning," reminder, this Kevin character is the one facing two lawsuits by the Murdoch law firm at the time he was interviewed, okay? Proctor tells Jack, "Buster Murdoch was on our radar long before we ever got this information. I'm calling you about it now. It's not like someone's going to say Kevin or Jack are the ones that put it on Buster. My office is out of Charleston. I don't work around Hampton. That name doesn't mean anything to me. My job is to find out, you don't have to agree with Stephen's lifestyle, but that doesn't mean he gets to be killed and no one gets to find out what happened," unquote. And so Jack responds, quote, "He was a cool person, honestly. We were all in class with him. It was shocking," unquote. So then Proctor says, quote, "He didn't get hit by no car. I'm not saying someone murdered him, but if it was somebody playing around and it got out of control, the problem is when you lie and you cover it up, Stephen's story deserves to be told," unquote. And then he says to Proctor that he can call Monica, and so Proctor calls Monica. that Jack mentioned, and then he also calls Kayla that Jack had mentioned as well. Monica did not answer. It appears that Monica and Kayla are, like I said, fake names as well, since no last names were given, but we're not totally 100% on that, but it does appear that way. And so Proctor gets Kayla on the phone, and Kayla says that she heard it from one of her classmates, and that one of her classmates, did it. And Proctor said, "Who's that?" And Kayla said, quote, "Buster Murdoch," unquote. Proctor said, quote, "I'll be honest with you, Buster Murdoch has been on our radar long before this," unquote. He then asked her if she heard the rumors from her father, who's in law enforcement, and Kayla said, quote, "No, sir," unquote. Proctor said, quote, "I've talked with quite a few people down there, and you have less to worry about since your daddy is a law enforcement officer. A lot of people seem nervous to say the name Murdoch. I understand they're pretty big down in Hampton, but I'm in Charleston, and that name doesn't mean anything to me, so I want you to understand that," unquote. And Kayla goes on to say she heard the rumor from another guy, also a fake name, Isaac. And she told Proctor she doesn't know how this Isaac knew about this, but he said that they beat up Stephen and they threw him out of a truck. So Proctor says, quote, "Everybody knew Stephen's lifestyle, but nobody really had issue with it. It doesn't sound like Buster had issues with him. It doesn't make sense. Regardless if you liked Stephen or agreed to his lifestyle, somebody killed him. His story deserves to be told, and that's why I'm trying to get to the bottom of this," unquote. And Proctor then asks Kayla about Buster's friend, another fake name, Cameron, and Kayla says she hung out with Cameron from time to time. And then Proctor says, quote, "My understanding is that Buster is really good friends with Cameron. Any knowledge of why his name keeps coming up?" unquote. Kayla says no, and then Proctor then asks Kayla to tell him where she can find this fake Isaac. Kayla then gave him somebody else's number that was named Mia in the documents, so Proctor now also calls Mia. So he calls Mia and he says, quote, "The information that was first given to me was that Buster Murdoch and one or two other people out that night saw Stephen's car, and they went down a road and saw him walking and held something out or swung something out of a car and accidentally hit him. Does any of that sound familiar?" unquote. And Mia said that she heard something about Buster, but she didn't remember. So then Proctor tells her, quote, "I'm out of Charleston. I'm not from the Hamptons, but I know the Murdoch name in Hampton is pretty big. But as far as I'm concerned, I couldn't give two craps about the Murdochs. But what I'm seeing is a lot of people seem to hesitate to talk to about the Murdochs or Buster. Do you kind of see that?" unquote. Now, he's obviously keeps saying this to these individuals because he's trying to gain trust, right? He's trying to let them know, like, you can tell me, you do not have to fear the Murdoch family name. And so then Mia said, quote, "When we were speaking about it, someone told me it was Buster. They were saying nothing could be done about it because of who he was," unquote. And then Proctor goes on to say, quote, "But that's the problem. I don't care about Buster. I'm not a local police officer in Hampton. I don't care about the last name Murdoch. I'm not saying I'm going to put it on Buster, but if he did do something, it needs to come out. The thing about it is we all know Stephen lived a different lifestyle, but it seems to me like no one really took issue to that. He seemed like the kind of guy everyone got along with. It seemed like no one really had issues with him. Someone had a part to play in his death. It wasn't that he was hit by a car. Something else happened, and the unfortunate part is my job is to tell Stephen's story because he can't. The Murdochs, as big and powerful or whatever rich they are, they're going to go on with their lives like nothing happened, so they can play that card like they care about everybody else. No, they don't. They care about protecting themselves. If Buster had something to do with it, I'd like to be able to prove that. But the information that I'm getting is kinda, I don't know, it started out strong because I had an individual who really stepped out against the Murdochs and was willing to talk, and it seems as I keep continuing on and talking to other people, it's getting watered down a good bit," unquote. And then Proctor asked this Mia if he had the fake Isaac's number, and she gives it to him. And then Proctor says, quote, "I'd like to get in touch with Isaac. where he got this information on how Buster was involved. I talked to several different people, and I've encouraged people not to hide anything. If you're friends with Isaac, let him know that I'm going to be in touch with him. None of you all are in any kind of trouble. I need someone to give me solid information aside from what the Murdochs are saying, unquote. There's no record that Proctor ever called this fake Isaac, and according to the investigation filed, the Highway Patrol didn't touch Stephen's case between September 2nd and October 20th of 2015. And then on October 20th of 2015, Proctor finally calls Buster Murdoch, and he notes that he didn't answer, voicemail was full, and that he emailed him. And this is the only time in the investigation that Highway Patrol attempted to talk to Buster Murdoch. Whew, okay. So then, on December 7th, the South Carolina Highway Patrol received an anonymous tip that said, quote, Dontero Aiken, along with another black male and a white male, a Murdoch, are the ones involved in Stephen's death, unquote. And then on December 18, 2015, Proctor received information about Daryl Williams, who says his stepson, Patrick Wilson, now reminder, Patrick is who we talked about earlier. He's the one that got into an argument and shot at a car in 2015, and he was with Sean Connolly. But Patrick told his stepfather, Daryl Williams, who is now telling investigators that Sean Connolly struck and killed Stephen Smith. And in Proctor's note, it says, Williams said his stepson told him incompetence, and that Mr. Williams stated that the reason that he was passing this information on to Proctor was because Randy Murdoch told him to call. Now, mind you, Randy is Alex's brother. So we have Patrick Wilson, who's telling his stepfather that Sean Connolly is the one that struck Stephen Smith, okay? And the stepdad then calls Proctor and tells him this, and he says the reason why he's telling him this is because Randy Murdoch is telling him to call police and give this information about what Patrick Wilson told him. Now, again, Patrick Wilson's the one who was shooting at a car, and his case was going through Hampton County 14th Judicial Circuit, and charges were dropped. That whole story we spoke about earlier. And when Proctor tried to call this Williams, who is the stepdad to Patrick Wilson, back to get more information out of him, Williams never returned his phone calls. So these are some of the things from Stephen's case file that I found interesting. It can literally be any of these people connected to these cases. SLED has a heck of a job on their hands figuring this out. There's just so many moving parts in this case. I thought the Lori Vallow, Chad Daybell case was insane, but I think the Murdoch case is taking the lead here. I feel like I need a whiteboard and also a corkboard with like pins and strings to piece this all together. In the next episode, I'm going to break down what information we know from the investigation into Mallory Beach's death. And I'll be continuing to follow more updates on Alex Murdoch as well. And as we discussed, he's now officially resigned. He was released from the hospital from the gunshot wound. He's now checked into rehab. I just got the alert as I was recording this that he has been suspended from his the bar. So that's huge news. So what's going to happen next? I don't know. Hopefully nothing before I get to the next episode and I have to re-record it because something else happens. But I'm also working on episode 3 of the Caitlin Connolly series before I do episode 3 of this Family Dynasty Murder Mystery. So let's recap this real quickly. So if you go back to Stephen Smith's case, the Murdoch family is mentioned 40 times. That is insane. Most of it is just rumors and tip-type talk, but you have this Sean Connolly and Patrick Smith who were involved in that shooting of a car, and that, Patrick Wilson was being processed through the same circuit office that the Murdochs work at or have worked at, and they had dropped the case and charges. And then you have this Corey Fleming, who is the close friend of the Murdoch family, who represented not only this Patrick Wilson, but Corey Fleming also represented the housekeeper's family in the wrongful death suit against Alex Murdoch. And Fleming also represented shortly Connor Cook, a passenger on the boat the night Mallory Beach was killed. And that's that. So there's a lot going on here, guys. So until next time, I'll see you soon. Thanks.